Please welcome M. Roy Wilson, President of Wayne State University. Waded Cruzado, President of Montana State University. Patrick Medvin, Director of Post-Secondary Success, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Renew Couture, President of the University of Houston. And Mark Rosenberg, President of Florida International University.
Okay, well, welcome to this session. Let me just start off by saying the following. All of the institutions represented here are leaders in innovation and trying new things to promote student success. And the Gates Foundation certainly has been, really had an intense focus in this area for quite some number of years. What I don't want happening is at the end of this session for any of you to say, you know, he didn't ask me about this one innovative thing that we're doing on our campus that I really wanted to talk about. So we're going to start there. What is the one really innovative thing that you're doing on your campus that you want everybody here to know about because you think it is just so cool? So Renew, can I start with you?
Sure. At the University of Houston, first of all, just so that everybody knows, we have 46,000 students, and according to the U.S. News and World Report, the second most diverse research university in the country. Of course, everything you saw here, a lot of things we're doing, you know, having a program called UHN4, having guided pathways to success, data analytics, all of that is going on there. But one thing we learned, which is last year, but that was my second storm, but Hurricane Harvey came to Houston. And it just came in the very first week, and one lesson it taught, very, very important lesson, that even though we have moved toward data, even though we have moved toward all kinds of systematic things, institutional things, there is serious value of accountability of people, the way they care for students. The touch and care piece, I think, just came out very strong. Because what I told the people was that if the students call and they wanted to drop out, they will not be allowed to drop out. There will be a personal call made to the student asking, why do you want to drop out? And we'll do whatever it takes to see if we can keep them in school. And after 2 weeks of closure, such devastation, I'm just proud to say we did not lose any students at all from Hurricane Harvey.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. Mark?
We're focused on changing how we think about students. In fact, we're starting to focus on learners rather than just students. Because I think if we don't become learner-centric, we're not going to be as relevant as we want to be as the workforce changes. And in doing that, we're identifying where the bottlenecks are. We've identified math in particular as a huge bottleneck, so we've completely restructured our intro math. We have taken 17 bottleneck courses and restructured those so that we could provide students with the greater likelihood of success, but asking the faculty to take responsibility, a greater responsibility for student learner. And I think in sum, it amounts to changing the mindset of how we work with our students. And there has generally been an acceptance of that by our faculty, such that our 6-year graduation rate has gone from roughly 41 to 59%. Our 4-year graduation rate has gone from 19 or 20 now to 44 we expect this year, and our target for this entering freshman class this year is 60% by 2022. So the mindset piece is critical, and then hard work behind it.
Right, yeah. With that?
Roy, first of all, I would like to give a shout out to Peter and to thank him for thinking about our veterans. And if I may, a point of privilege, I just was thinking when he was saying that, that in Montana, we had the first woman that was elected to Congress, Jeannette Rankin. She was elected in 1916. Just in time to vote no against World War I. And then she was elected again in 1944, just in time to vote no against World War II. So it's about thinking about things in a different way. I would like to start by saying many of us, we just need to say, we've come a long way. I'm thinking about some past meetings of APLU where we would not have talked about these topics, but now we are, and it's a good thing. I remember when I wrote my inauguration address for Montana State University in 2010, and I mentioned that our freshman retention rate was unacceptable, I received a phone call from University Communications basically saying, you cannot say that. And I said, oh yes, I can. But first of all, the most important thing that all of us have done and we can do as leaders is to have that clarion call, right? To establish there is a way in which we can get things done in a different manner. At Montana State University, we were fortunate. We attract an incredible proportion of the best and brightest high school students in Montana. But I always say that if all we do is attract the best and the brightest, then we reduce the promise of the land-grant university to just being a conveyor belt. It's a place where the outputs are going to be exactly the same of the inputs. We believe in a university that's not a conveyor belt, but rather a combustible engine, right? Where we take those students wherever they are, and out they go out in 4 years being competent professionals and better and healthier human beings. What we have done at Montana State University in order to address that, we created the Helaman Scholars, named after one of our alums, an orphan born in Miles City, Montana. Very few opportunities in life. He graduated from Montana State University in 1941, top of his class, simply because his brother brought him to Montana State University looking for a scholarship. Then what we do is that we go out in rural Montana and we choose those students that don't see themselves as college materials. We surround it with a lot of structure. These are students that commit to graduate in 4 years. They enroll in 15 credits. They start their day in the summertime at 7 in the morning taking math, taking English and composition. Then the last 2 years they work for us, actually mentoring lower division students. In the first 3 years, the Helaman Scholars actually outperform the average student at Montana State University in GPAs and in the number of credits that they approve.
That's great. Patrick, you know, the Gates Foundation has certainly focused on this area of student success for a few years now, and you've put a lot of investment into it. What is the one innovative thing that you're really excited about that you've invested in?
So you're clearly trying to bait me into a technology play there. Interestingly enough, I think that's what most people expect to hear from the Gates Foundation is the house that Microsoft built. But I'll maybe take a different turn on that. Our strategy is about 10 years old, and sure enough, in pure technocratic fashion, 10 years ago, we looked at loss and momentum points for students, and then said, let's throw some technology at DevEd, right? And that was at a time when we were focusing mostly in the community college space, and I guess it makes a lot of sense. So we tried that in a number of places, a lot of silver bullet kind of things. Oh, this innovation, this technology. And about 3 years in, we did something different, which we launched something called Completion by Design. It was in the community college space. It was colleges from 3 states working together, trying to learn their way through innovation. And it wasn't about the solutions. They knew some of the solutions, much like we shared earlier. We know many of the solutions here, but what's the change process look like? And I think that was critical and one of my favorites for 3 reasons. One, 90% of the colleges that took part in that beat their goals, their completion goals, a year and a half ahead of schedule. 2, they learned very openly with us, which told us about not just the solutions, but what are the capacities for change that you need? What kind of strength do you need in your IR and data team? What kind of strength do you need in your CFO's office to fund the journey? What are the capacities you need to take you to that next level? And the third, it taught us a lot about networks and how ideas share back and forth. And I think some of the investments we've made in APLU recently really build on that, which is, hey, there seems to be some promise in there. If you put smart people together in a room, you put some frame around it, some general goals, they can do amazing things. And so I'd say that investment that was 7 years ago has really laid the path for a lot of the work we're doing today.
Great. Well, Dad, you made a observation that we wouldn't be having this discussion years back. And what's so special about now? I mean, what's the imperative to focus on this now? And you know, just to add on to that, the collaborative that we just heard about in the really scaling up student success. This is the first time that I'm aware of where so many universities have gotten together to collaborate on tackling a problem. You know, why is it important for this inter-university collaboration? So the first part is, you know, what's special about now for focusing on this issue, and then why inter-university collaboration? If you can take a stab at that.
Well, I think that we have come to the realization as a nation that we just cannot continue leaving people behind, right? That there was a price to pay when 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when many of us in the audience were admitted to the university, we had university presidents saying, look to your left, look to your right, those individuals will never graduate. Did you ever hear that before? That's how I was welcomed, by a way to welcome freshmen. And yet what we forgot is that those individuals, they just do not dissipate in thin air. We were just sending them back to society with a message of failure, and we were actually very complacent sometimes in the university, feeling that we were weeding out individuals. So finally we come to the realization that that is not the most wise or moral use of our resources, particularly in public institutions. And I think that at least in my university, what we have looked at is at history and said there was a time in our history as a nation where we had incredible needs. We were a hungry nation back in the 1850s. And we came up with this miracle of this idea of let's come up and build not just one public university, but one public university in each state and territory of the Union for the purpose of educating the sons and daughters of the working families of America. They will solve our problems. That's how we've created the land-grant universities with agriculture to feed our nation and the world, with engineering to solve many of our problems. So I think that it's a good acknowledgement that we have had that the past was not acceptable anymore.
Well, Patrick, you know, there are a lot of issues the Gates Foundation could be focusing on. You know, why this particular focus on student success, and why at this point now?
We do focus on a lot of issues.
You do.
We're
yes.
working on polio in Afghanistan.
Yep.
We're
No,
working on financial services. But in the U.S., for us, it squarely falls in education, as that's the ticket. There's one thing that holds all of our strategies at the foundation together. It's the belief that all lives have equal value, and that means something different if you're in sub-Saharan Africa and you're working on under 5 mortality. In the U.S., it's about education. That's the ticket. And for us right now in higher education, I think, so I'm an economist by training, so I really appreciated the keynote tonight. There are a few reasons that are economically based that were discussed. One of those is, you know, about the kind of workforce imperative that Tony Carnevale and others at GCW speak about. Another, I think, that is just as important, frankly, for many of the institutions in this country, is Enlightened Self-Interest, which is the economics of our institutions don't look that great right now. The pressures of state funding going down, Ball Mills cost disease, meaning your cost pressures are going up. It's one of an imperative for many institutions, not as many in this room, but particularly the small liberal arts privates and some of the community colleges in rural areas are facing that. I choose, though, from the Gates Foundation, the reason why now is the time is actually a social justice one, which I think we got a little bit of that in the presentation tonight. But let me put another piece of data out in front of us, which is in the past 20 years, the wealth gap between African American and Caucasian families has gone from 6x to 13x. Okay, so you don't see that in Raj Chetty's data the same way that's talking about economic quartiles or deciles in the same way in movement, but it's buried under there, and it's just as poisonous, if not more so, than the economic imperative there. And so for us, for the foundation, that's why we're in it, which is really from a social justice perspective.
Well, the Gates Foundation has the resources that they could say for every university that increases their success rates by X%, you get X amount of money. So Renew and Mark, what's the importance of this cross-university collaboration that this new collaborative is getting at? I mean, we could all just do it ourselves.
Right. First of all, I think we have come to a point where just we have to make it a no excuse priority, the student success or degree completion. I mean, we've used all kinds of excuses in the past. You know, you can't do it because you have too many at-risk students, or you have too many first-generation students. We just saw that economic pressures and the demographic pressures are there where you cannot use any more excuses. So now that you have to own the problem, and I think most institutions, public institutions, we are all here, we have owned this problem. Now we know that we have to solve it. And now the question comes, how are we going to solve it? Either you can go and fly on your own, or you can learn from one another. And I've seen that every single time I have visited an institution, even though it might be part of accreditation process, or it might be part of football team going and playing there, you always end up learning something, and the light bulb goes on saying, wow, if you have a formal networking piece and a formal consortium like this, where you, on a regular basis, you and your people, your teams are learning from one another, why do we have to reinvent the wheel? So I think it becomes really important that we come together, we share what is working for us, what is not working for us, and they're both things. I mean, I could talk about a lot of things that we tried and didn't work. And I can tell you a lot of things that we tried, they half worked. I mean, we talked earlier about free tuition. Of course, I mean, we have free tuition for every student who comes with 50,000 family income. And I can tell you the graduation rate of that group and the other group is not even 2 percentage point difference. So we had to add many other pieces in order to really achieve success. And I can say this year, I mean, you can look at it, our Pell Grant recipients versus non-Pell Grant recipients, which is a social economic divide, the graduation rate is exactly the same. So, I mean, we had to dissect the pieces, and then we have to say, okay, this solution here is different, this solution here is different, this is different, and that's how we have to now tackle the problem. And I think earlier, we probably were not as invested, and I think it takes personal leadership, it takes personal I think attention at every level, and I agree with what Mark said. It's a paradigm shift, and I can totally tell you that I see that shift. But now we have a new challenge, which we may or may not have time to talk, and that is, I thought we have got everything right for what students needed and what we needed to do to get them to be successful. All of a sudden now, we have got this new Gen Zs on campus. They think differently, they have totally different habits, their priorities are different, and now we are scratching our heads again. How do we engage them? I mean, they are used to immediate, customized information on time, no day and night difference. So now we are in the mode of changing things all over again.
Yeah. So Mark, do you have anything you want to add to that in terms of why this? Yeah, I know she was very thorough. This cross-university collaborative is important.
So I'm not convinced that really yet anything significant is happening. Let's not get too comfortable. The level of public concern about what we do is at an all-time high at the national level, although individually and locally our institutions seem to have a great deal of support locally. That's one. Two, that we've been talking about years about best practices in STEM education. And yet for a number of us who have been on national initiatives looking at STEM education, there's an incredible degree of variability across this country within institutions themselves about how best to teach STEM courses, when we know that discipline-based education research has to be a norm of how we do our work. And yet, there is incredible variability across this country and within institutions about that. Thirdly, that we are I think we're doing a better job of listening to the public. So I like the idea of us getting together, but I worry about our tone deafness as it relates to what's being said out there about what we need to do. There are huge competency gaps and skills gaps and employment gaps. And I believe that public research universities have done the research part very well, but understanding the interface between what we do and 21st century workforce needs is still very much, in my mind, lagging. And it could end up costing us significant numbers of learners across time because we are rigid in offering 4-year, 5-year, 6-year degrees, semester-long courses rather than just-in-time courses, weekend learnings that are needed by changes in the workforce. We are very slow to react. So I guess I feel a sense of urgency, and I think the cluster initiative that we're starting is very, very important, but the world isn't going to wait for us to get this figured out, and there are alternatives for our learners out there that start right with your handheld device that can be gotten. I got to say that from the viewpoint of a large minority serving institution that we are, and that many of you, if you're not, you will be, that air cover is critically important as well. So I'm very grateful to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for instance, for underwriting the frontier set, for putting a stake in the ground, for finding ways to open up our universities to eligible but perhaps lower income students who deserve the same chance to get a college education as those who are already much more advantaged. I think that's critical, and I think we need more support and more encouragement to do that, because all the directions are pushing us more towards rankings, more towards input indicators to get the output indicators, which I think is going to further enhance the income gap. So I have a sense of urgency about us accelerating our ability to be responsive.
So I'm going to stick with you for a second, Mark. From what I hear, what you're saying is that we're not adapting fast enough for the workforce of the next century, and that we've got to do much more. Now, we can say the same thing related to student success.
Yeah.
You know, we've known for decades what experiences the student needs to get out of college, and we're beginning to know with some level of accuracy. In fact, Becky mentioned what the university, what the institution should be doing in terms of, advising, in terms of psychosocial support, in terms of affordability. So we know a lot about what the student needs and what the university, what the institution should be doing. Why is it so hard, Mark, for us to adapt and change to achieve greater success in student success?
I think we're trapped on our own educational paradigms, and we're less sensitive to the broader changes in context and what it means for us and our respective institutions. And the demographics that Renew referred to is one, but you also get a changing workforce. I mean, the changing workforce in this country is very dramatic. And have we really thought that through and responded to it in a way that I know that we can? I don't think so. I think there's a certain complacency in our work.
Other thoughts that any of the panelists have in terms of why it is, despite the knowledge that we have in terms of what should be done and what the student needs, why it's so hard to scale student success, and why it's so hard for universities to adapt?
I have two thoughts, Roy. One of them is there's a profound misalignment between the incentives that we perceive that the university should receive and that our faculty perceive that they need to pursue. So it's important for us, if we are truly committed research, public universities with student success, we need to look for ways to better align our promotion and tenure guidelines, the conversations that we have the activities and events that we reward our faculty for, rather than having these two parallel worlds living in coexistence. The second thing is, as Mark was saying, is this paradigm that we have come to accept as normal, that we are convinced that it's okay for students to fail, that somehow it's just the student responsibility, that we have nothing to do with it. It's because they are ill-prepared. This notion about college readiness has done a great disservice to public universities. I'm not going to talk about the private institutions. They are in a different lane, which is not my lane. But every time that I hear this thing about college readiness, I go back and I always say, 1862, when we were founded as land-grant universities, was also the same year that gave us the Homestead Act. So it doesn't require a lot of imagination to think that many of our first students were homesteaders as well. And I always ask, how many homesteaders do you think were college ready? Right? But but we are perfectly okay with that notion, and it's almost like if we were hospitals, we will be perfectly fine treating the patients that are healthy. But don't say anything else.
I think culture is hard to change. It's a big ship. Even when the change is happening, it just is difficult to notice it. But accountability does make a difference, and I'll just give an example. So we have advisors, and advisors obviously used to have the sheet that will say, okay, I advised and I advised this, and the whole file gets created behind a student. The minute you change the system and say, okay, advisors, now if you have your students, 300 cohort is given to you, and we are no longer, I don't care whether you sit in your office for 8 hours or you do the chat or you do the text or do whatever. You are being assessed at the end of the semester by what is the GPA of your student cohort, how many came back. All of a sudden, a complete system change, and you can see people taking ownership in a very different way. I think the question becomes, there's so many of those moving pieces, and I feel like I try to attack one and then two more ready to be attacked. So I think it's a cultural issue, but at the same time, sometimes I think I agree that the incentives are still misaligned, and slowly we have to do part ourselves, and slowly part of it has to be done through the state and through the system, so we have to continue to educate. But I mean, I agree with Mark, and we have been good friends for a long time, but I would still say I want to make sure we create momentum from everything that we have done rather than dismissing it, because I think it's a complex, complicated thing, and I'm proud of the institution. I mean, you just won. I mean, the awards, so congratulations on that. Obviously, you're doing something right, and if you can do it, all of us can do it. So let's just take inspiration from one another, and let's just take this pledge that diversity and excellence are not mutually exclusive. Yeah. They are one and the same.
Patrick, from the Gates Foundation standpoint now, are we moving fast enough, or are you frustrated?
No, we're not moving fast enough for my co-chair meetings with Bill and Melinda in terms of the expectations. I just want to thread something here, which is between kind of the cross-institutional collaboration and the internal alignment piece. So a few years back, we started funding a number of partners to develop these sorts of kind of self-assessments about what are your capacities in strategic finance or in IR and data, and how are you doing on some of these evidence-based practices around advising or digital learning, et cetera. And we started sharing that with a number of partners. Some of the frontier set institutions took those, and we thought what that would show is institutions showing up saying, I'm really strong at this and I need some help at this, because we can't actually progress together without that awareness. We found something interesting in that process. So if we gave it to 30 people, let's say administrator and mid-level administrator, 30 people within an institution, they would come in and take it, and they would have vastly different answers to the same questions. And it would force some degree of consensus making to say, okay, I'm a faculty and I thought our dev ed practices look like this and the administration thought they look like this. Well, let's have a conversation about that. We created the thing for the cross-institutional collaboration. As it turns out, probably the most powerful thing was about internal alignment because of some of these silos and the misaligned incentives. So I think the two can do both, because if you're going to go out in the world and collaborate, you have to get your house in order to some degree to be able to have a meaningful conversation.
Well, let me say on that, Roy, that we in the state of Florida have, like most states now, have performance funding and very specialized accountability across a range of measures. And while a lot of us, including me, were unhappy with some of the specific measures because we didn't think that they addressed our mission-specific approaches, I can tell you that as a consequence of this, there's never been a time when we've known more about ourselves than now. So we meet on a quarterly basis with department chairs and deans in a room that is about a fourth of this size, and we go over all the data of each of those units' performance. And we're all in the room. We try to ask hard questions about what is going on, why can't we do better, and what do we need to do now to fix the problem. And so I got to tell you that I feel really good about that, to the point about how do we take seriously speaking to each other within our respective institute, which, by the way, most of us know that rarely happens. We're too busy doing the things we need to do. And so I think that there are some positive, to Renu's point, very positive developments that we definitely can build on. And the more questions we ask of our department chairs and they ask of us, the more we recognize just how complex the matter is and how much harder we're going to have to work to make real progress. But I am very proud of the fact that faculty get that. They understand that. And the ones who don't, they're not. But there are, in any faculty, leaders who want to be out in front, who want to do things better. And that's who this whole process can appeal to and empower. So I'm optimistic. I want you to know that. But I worry that the pace of change just isn't rapid enough to cover the ground we're going to need to cover if this income inequality piece is going to change.
Well, Peter mentioned that the clusters met, I guess it was yesterday, was that?
Saturday.
Yeah, yesterday. And I think they met for like 5 hours or something, so I think people are taking this very, very seriously. It's kind of an experiment to a certain extent, right? Because it hasn't been done before. So what would each of you say that each cluster has to be mindful of to assure success? And success I'm defining as an outcome of more diverse students ultimately getting their degrees.
I'll say two things. One is be open to share, because as we learn and we discuss, we talk, we learn about ourselves as well in the process. So having a stronger teams around you is going to make you stronger. So I think I'll say that. And I think the second thing that's very important is that don't blindly follow the practice that has worked somewhere else. Because you have to, every institution has its own culture, its own history. You may have to tweak it in some other way. So there is no solid solution that comes and can be just implanted. And I have seen it, and we've tried it, and I think that would be a very important lesson.
I'd say keep the groups heterogeneous. Make sure there's extreme diversity in the working group, so that you have operators on the ground level, and you have mid-level managers, and you have more senior people mixed together. We found that's worked very well in our strands in the in the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities. That's been the exciting thing, where we can talk across levels of responsibility. That's critically important, and one size isn't going to fit all, to reinforce Renu's point.
I agree with all of the above, and I also would like to say, yes, it's a wicked problem, it's complex, but at the same time, I loved what Becky said today. Keep it simple. There are a number of initiatives out there that we have all tried with different names, right? That we know that they work, and they are not rocket science. Having students understand that time is the enemy, that enrolling in 15 credits, it's a good thing for them, because actually they do academically better. It's something that has been proven. We have our freshman 15 in Montana State University, where in addition to the pounds that they're going to add to the waistline, add some rigor. But keep it simple. We have that incentive in place in the books for decades. Students were not enrolling in more credits because we were not taking the time to deliver the message in a very simple manner. Another thing that we have learned, our students who are receiving Pell recipients, they don't know sometimes what they need to do to graduate, or if they miss a class, that they're going to lose that eligibility. So if they are in debt, we send them a letter, and we said, this is the Know Your Debt letter. Roy, we value you at Montana State University, but we notice that you have accumulated $13,000 in debt. So why don't you come to our financial literacy office? We'll talk about freshman 15. We'll tell you about opportunities for you to graduate on time. And by the way, Roy, if you come, we're going to give you $20. We have done that at Montana State University, and it has been proven that now students enrolling more credits, they actually are borrowing less, and they are graduating on time. I know that we get impatient, but it works. We have been able to increase freshman retention by 7%. Sophomore, with a new program, 10%. And we are registering the largest growth in 4 years and 6-year graduation rates. If we just get so focused on that, this is so difficult, this is so complex, this is too slow, I don't think that we're going to make the progress. We need to keep it possible and keep it simple.
Right. I just wanted to add one other thing that here, kind of, again, the spirit of where our students, where our learners are at. I think one of the lessons that we can take from the last decade or so, given the growing mobilization, the growing concerns of our students, is I think we have to do a better job of meeting students where they are, not where we want them to be. And that means, since there's such a huge diversity of students and student interests and student approaches, we're going to have to do a much better job at understanding those, and not necessarily accommodating, but changing how we do things in order to stay effective. And I believe that's also a big challenge for us, because we have rigid structures, rigid regulatory frameworks, but it's going to take some leadership for us to do that and to improve our responsiveness.
So Patrick, you have any advice that you would give the institutions in these clusters?
I mean, look, we're listening to the pros here. People are like scribbling furious about 15, and then, wait, hold on, freshman 15, that doesn't sound right. Maybe it does sound right. I think the point regarding really taking a student-centric mindset throughout, and then, with Houston, I think it's interesting because I think, President Couture, you're sharing a little bit about kind of vulnerability within that network and showing up and being vulnerable to your peers. You guys are doing this with multiple 2 years and 4 years in Houston through the GPS. So if you think this is difficult with peer institutions, same Carnegie classification, try it in a whole metropolitan area with very different missions. And so I don't have anything to add to what these folks are saying here.
I think what Peter was pointing out is we have this going on in Houston with 11 institutions, 5 public universities and 6 community colleges, 350,000 students impacted, all of them in common data system, so that when you start from wherever, you can seamlessly move and don't take excess courses and you get attention. It has been hugely, hugely complex,
yes,
and process that has tested all of our patients and pull the leaders together, and then the second layer of management and the third. And But if it is successful, I mean, that's the high-stake game. If it's successful, I mean, that can truly change, you know, in a major way.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. We have about 5.5 minutes left. And so I am going to allow each of you to make a closing statement on anything you want to related to this, to give everyone one final wisdom in terms of what it is that you think is most important to convey at this point. So we'll start with you with that in about a minute or so.
Wow. Mark was talking about this new generation, and when we and Renu said that now that we think that we have figured this out, now the generation changes again, and it's the iGen. I have also heard about that. But the value added that we have to offer to this generation is not information. Information can be Googled. The value added is the relationships that we can provide those students with. And a sense of how do they overcome fragility, right? The topic of this conference is resilience. And we do something incredible to our high school seniors. We take them from 13 years of being highly protected, sheltered, where parents can see exactly what every homework every day. And then when they graduate in less than 60 days, we're saying, well, you cannot touch your kids, right? And parents need to stay away. And somehow that kid needs to figure that out in less than 60 days because now he's an adult. I think that we can do a better job in building not only more resilient citizens, but actually, I love the concept of anti-fragility, right? What can we do to go beyond resilience, beyond robustness, not only to allow that kid to get an education and go out to society, but actually to learn from the environment, even with all the stressors that they have nowadays, so that they can go out and be not only a competent professional, but a happy human being.
Good. Mark?
I'd like to challenge my colleagues here to develop a better understanding of where our 21st century workforce is going and how we can be more effective at playing roles in their lifelong education. So that's one. We haven't had a discourse that allows us to be overly concerned with what happens after they graduate. And I think we're going to have to get a lot more concerned. I'd like to see us break down the boundaries between public and private. I'd like to see us have better partnerships, win-win partnerships with industry and with the private sector so that we can be more responsive. Because I see us as incredible clusters of talent, and a lot of that talent isn't helping us to improve the quality of life of our communities. So I think those challenges I would be very interested in working with APLU on and with anybody who wants to have those conversations and do something about it.
Renu?
I think I would say that I'll keep it very simple, and that is we have to constantly think about what is our core mission. Yes, we do research, that's our differentiator, but the core mission for us is really the students and their success and their education. Now, what other business could survive, let alone thrive, if they did not pay attention to the core mission? I mean, you can go to a restaurant, get seated next to a window with beautiful scene outside, and you can get served, nice cold water, have music. But if the food that comes to you and you leave half your food, you just eat half and you leave, I mean, think about it, would people come back? We just have survived this long because we have monopoly on what we do. We are the ones who define what the demand is. We're the one who define what the product is. We're the one who certify the product has been given and it's a good quality. We have to think very, very hard. What is our core mission? And if we keep our eyes on core mission, we'll find 9 different ways of meeting that mission. And I think that's what I'll just like to leave you with, because that's where my passion is.
Great. Patrick?
I think I just leave with a message of humility and gratitude for the leaders in this room, because I agree with you. We're here because we think that is the core mission. But the fact of the matter is you lead very complex enterprises. We're coming here asking for you to focus on one component of that. We happen to think it's the most important, but you got a lot of other things going on. You're running multiple $100 million enterprises, and so the gratitude is for what you do, the humility is for the complexity in which you do it, and just a plea to lean in on this with us, because I think we can change the country.
Good. Well, those of you in the audience don't know this, but there's a timer up here, and it's got exactly 16 seconds left. So let me thank Rebecca Blank for a terrific keynote. I want to thank the panelists for a wonderful conversation, and thank you all for attending this session. Thank you.